So as you have played with these guys and these master instrumentalists, is there anything you've kind of taken away from your experience playing with them that you kind of keep for yourself as you kind of go forward with your musical life?
Absolutely. I mean, when you're playing with a musician that you say you've never played with before, you see your music through that person's eye. And that person has a different way of looking at your music. And so you see nooks and corners, that you may have overlooked. I mean, you know how it is, like Armstrong had to go to the moon to look at the earth and then realize how beautiful a planet we live on. And so for me to live in my house, everything is taken for granted. But when I step out of the house and I look at it and, oh, wow, it's so beautiful. And those trees make it look so nice and whatnot. It's just as important. So yes, when I'm playing with people like Bela and Edgar or anybody else, I'm really looking forward to them actually showing me shades in my music that kind of I bypassed because I just took it for granted, and so it helps me to grow and also look at my music in a way where I can then find new ways to be able to express the old story, tell the old story in a new way and new words that come from the language that Bela and Edgar bring to the table.
Was there anything, I guess, specifically that you can kind of recall that maybe you said, I kind of like what they did, this or this perspective, and you kind of decided to incorporate that yourself?
Yes, I mean, the dynamics. Western classical music has that. Bluegrass has that, how they play with each other and they go down and they come up and they, the climax is approached and a great finale and whatnot, and all that element happens. In Indian music, all that happens at a very gradual pace. If you're playing an Indian song or a classical piece, it would blossom in a space of, say, about 1 hour.
Wow.
Yeah, one song. Yeah. So to have that ability to be able to compress that experience into a piece of music which may be 5, 6, 7, 8 minutes long, and to be able to create those dynamic ranges and be able to hear each other in a way that, it's not like you don't have to play all through the bar, all through the measure, all through the song. You just have to find your little spots so that when you appear, it's highlighted. But when you are just sitting, on the floor with everybody else, that, you are part of the filigree. You're not the standout flower. You don't need to be that every time.
Right.
And that's something that, playing with Bela and Edgar has brought forth, into my playing. And I've understood how to layer, how to just do one little tone somewhere that will highlight an idea and not have to worry about, I mean, in my old days, I used to want to just play 80,000 notes at a time, being a percussionist. Now I realize playing with these guys that that's not really necessary, that just, tying a ribbon somewhere is all that's needed, and it's fine.
Wow. I mean, that's awesome that you were able to, still being in the business and having this career for so long, that you're still able to grow and incorporate new aspects into your music, which kind of makes me want to go back a little bit. People kind of have described you as a child prodigy growing up in your instrument. First of all, would you describe yourself as that? And if you do,
I don't. I don't think that child prodigy or anything like that does really matter. Yes, when you're growing up in a house which has nothing but music going on, as a baby, things get printed into your mind and, on your brain cells that, that you are able to recognize and realize that, by the time you reach a certain age. And so you arrive there sort of already in place to be able to inject those ideas into your playing. And that's what happened with me. My father used to sing rhythms in my ear when I was a baby, and he would do that for hours every day. And so by the time I was 3, it's like all this mumbo jumbo in my head, and I had no idea what to do with it until he put this drum in front of me, and then I started, oh, okay, now I get what's happening here. So that's there. But once, I mean, like a young kid singing, 7 or 8 or 9-year-old angelic voice, but when his voice breaks and this Adam apples starts to protrude, things change. What do you do then? I mean, child prodigy is something is a statement that is being expanded into so many areas, which is not necessary. Joey Alexander is this great young pianist who arrived from Indonesia and is somebody who is now sitting and trading licks with Herbie Hancock or Chick Corea or so on. And he's only like 15 years old. So people wonder about how is that possible? It's only possible because he grew up listening to all that stuff. And somewhere along the line, he will realize what to do with it, and he won't be a child prodigy anymore, or he'll just be a great master of music, and we are all looking forward to seeing that happen. So I don't believe in child prodigyness. I think that's putting a hell of a lot of pressure on the young wee bairn. It's best to leave them alone to do whatever they do, and just wonder at what is the spirit that sits inside that being that is allowing that to happen, and just appreciate the blessing that has been put forth on that small child, and just see the ways of spirits that we don't know anything about and what they do.
I was kind of getting to that point actually, in the sense that when if someone label you something like that, there's a tendency to place expectations on you. So I was gonna kind of wanted to get from you an idea if there was any kind of pressure to be successful from a commercial standpoint, since everybody consider you this, have a master of your instrument. Did you feel any pressure to kind of live up to these expectations?
Well, my father was considered the greatest percussionist of his time, of his generation. So me being a student was already a major issue, because if I did great when I was 12 or 13-year-old performing, and everybody would say, yeah, of course, he's his son, of course. And if I did bad, oh, look, his son, bad, man, how could you do that? So those were things that one had to kind of deal with and come to terms with it. I was very lucky. I was very fortunate. By the time I was 18, I had left India, and I'd arrived in America to teach and play, and and I ran into all these great musicians. So I was able to be in a situation where I grew as a musician, and I was able to ply my my trade without being under the scrutinizing eyes of connoisseurs and critics and so on. So I was able to work my way into this situation at a leisurely pace. At the same time, my father once told me, and he being the great musician, that he didn't tell me, he told his friend, who actually told him, oh, your son plays just like you. And my father said, I hope he doesn't. I hope he plays better than me. He plays different than me. And his friend asked him why. And he said, because I am already done. That's already established. It's already in place. Him doing me would just be him copying me and being a Xerox copy. And Xerox copies get thrown into the waste bin. The hard copy, the real one, is what's kept. So he doesn't need to do that. He needs to be able to be his own self and have his own statement. So that, having come to me from him, gave me the freedom to be able to not care about anybody else, but just do whatever the hell it is that I wanted to do.
Well, that sounds like some great support.
He allowed me to work with John McLaughlin or with George Harrison or Van Morrison, and I did work with Earth, Wind and Fire and all those guys in late 70s, early 80s. And he said, oh, good, fine. But do come back to India every year and play Indian music, which I promised I would, and I did, and I still do.
Now, I know that you, like you just said, you play a lot of Indian music, but do you still find that a lot of Western artists kind of still intrigued by your sound and kind of really want to incorporate that element that you bring?
Well, I think that a lot of the musicians, whether they're great or they're just, fabulous and good musicians, they all want to grow. They all want, I mean, what did George Harrison do? He wanted to, at the height of his career, selling multi-million records and whatnot, and being hailed as one of the great superstars of his time, What did he do? He went to learn music with Ravi Shankar. What did John Coltrane do? He looked towards India and say, I want to do some modal improvisation. So did Bird, Charlie Parker did the same thing. And so did John McLaughlin, the great jazz guitarist, and all these guys were really into learning. And Bela and Edgar, they are not any different. Charles Lloyd from Memphis is pretty much the same. They all want to grow. They all want to learn more. And that's what's great about master musicians. I mean, they realize that they are students first, masters later. If you don't learn, you don't grow, and you don't reinvent yourself, you stagnate. You know, and somewhere along the line, people say, oh yeah, been there, done it, seen that, now let's move on. So you must find ways to be able to be telling the same story in as many different ways as possible. And that means looking to wherever you can to find the language that makes it sound different.
Wow. So speaking of reinvigorating themselves and reimagining themselves, you've seemed to have done that as by becoming an author.
I managed to do that, yes. People felt that, you know, at the age that you are now, you should write a book, or you could get a doctorate, or you should be recognized and whatnot and everything. So all that happens. But, you know, this was just basically a book that I wrote. It's called Zakir Hussain, A Life in Music. And I just wanted to, I am not writing about music. I'm not writing about stuff that I've learned and I'm sharing that with people. I'm just writing about what I was as a young man and what helped me to embark on this beautiful journey. And what this journey actually is, what this music actually is, may come out at a later stage in some other printed form or whatever. But that's what this book is about, is my journey from the day I was born and what happened then. I will give you a little snippet. When I was brought home as a two-day-old child from the hospital, the tradition is that the father takes the child in his hand and reads a prayer in his ear. And that's the first words of wisdom that a child must hear in his ear. So my father took me in his arm and sang rhythms in my ear. And my mother was very upset and irritated. She said, what are you doing? You're supposed to do the prayers. And my father said, well, this is my prayer. This is how I pray. My rhythms are my chants. They are my Gregorians. They are my shlokas, or whatever you want to call them. And this is what he's going to do. So he should learn them now. And so that's what it is. I mean, but that's how I began my journey. And that's what took me out and brought me all the way here. And that's what's listed in here. Just the first step. Like I say in the book, you know, the bus was there. I was already on the bus before it took off. So I was lucky.
Now, had you always wanted to write a book, or you just looking for the right time, or?
My arms were twisted. I didn't, even this, I didn't want to. I don't consider myself worthy enough in any way to be able to pen ideas for people to follow. That's a big responsibility. That's huge. And I don't consider myself ready for that kind of responsibility. So, but there were friends who said I must put this in, and so it came out, and there it is.
All right. So are you feeling pretty good about it?
I feel okay about it. It's at least I'm not misquoted, so that's good, and there are no misprints, and so grammatically it's okay. My wife read it, proofread it. She's an MA, I'm not, and so it was good that there was help available at home for it to all come together.
So you were saying that there's a possibility that there may be an additional part to this book too, right?
Well, you know, it's like this: you do it once, the bug bites, and you want to, hey, okay, this isn't so bad. Let me see if I can do it again. So I am in the middle of trying to work out this thing called the first lesson. Is from that day in my year, and so the music, and so what I'm going to do is write a book where my lessons would be the stories, each chapter, and what those lessons were, where they came from, who the masters were, and what other stories related to it, and then pen it down and write it out, you know, make charts of it so people for it to be able to play. So that's something else that I'm going to work on.